They thought I was nothing, a failure, a disappointment, a charity case. But tomorrow morning, when they wake up, they'll realize I own everything they built, and I'm about to destroy it. The cheap, wrinkled coupon sat in my palm, the faded ink mocking me. $20 off your next purchase at Budget Mart. That was my 30th birthday gift. Laughter erupted around me, bouncing off the glittering chandeliers of the Aurelia, one of Manhattan's most exclusive rooftop restaurants. A place where a single glass of wine cost more than what my family thought I was worth. Oh, come on, Dani, don't look so offended, Ryan chuckled, swirling the whiskey in his glass. We figured you could use a little help, since you're always scraping by. Scraping by. That's what they thought. Across the table, my mother, Evelyn Carter, flashed her signature tight-lipped smile, the same one she used when dismissing anything beneath her concern. It's practical, sweetheart. You've always been frugal. My father, Thomas Carter, real estate mogul, corporate kingmaker, barely looked up from his phone. You should be grateful, he muttered. Grateful? I nearly laughed. Because while they sat there, sipping their overpriced drinks, celebrating my supposed failure, my phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out, glancing at the notification. Acquisition confirmed. Carter and Company is now under Phoenix Holdings. My grip tightened. They had no idea. For years, they mocked me. They dismissed me. They thought I was insignificant. Tomorrow, they would wake up to a nightmare. The next morning, the skyline of Manhattan stretched before me, a city pulsing with opportunity and power. But today, power belonged to me. Inside the towering glass structure of Carter and Company, tension crackled like a live wire. Whispers filled the halls, employees hunched over their desks, eyes darting toward the executive conference room, where the future of the company was about to change forever. Ryan Carter sat at the head of the table, his posture stiff, his jaw locked. He had spent the morning fielding frantic calls from board members, desperately trying to make sense of what had happened overnight. His family's legacy, the company that had defined his entire identity, was no longer theirs. And he had no idea who had taken it from him. The door swung open. My heels clicked against the polished marble floor as I stepped inside. Silence fell over the room. Ryan's eyes locked onto mine, confusion flickering into something darker. "What the hell are you doing here?" he demanded, voice sharp. I smiled, slow and deliberate, and placed a thick folder onto the table. "I think you already know." One of the board members, a man in his 60s with silver hair and wary eyes, cleared his throat. "Ms. Carter, he hesitated, glancing toward Ryan. "You're the new owner?" I nodded. "That's correct." Ryan let out a short, humorless laugh, pushing back in his chair. "This is a joke. A stunt." "There's no way." He reached for his phone, scrolling furiously through his emails. I watched as the color drained from his face. Acquisition finalized. Carter and Company is now a subsidiary of Phoenix Holdings. He swallowed hard. This isn't possible." I tilted my head. "Oh, Ryan. It's not just possible. It's done." Across the table, the other board members sat frozen, watching the unraveling of their golden boy. I leaned forward, resting my hands on the table. Under my leadership, Carter and Company will no longer be a playground for entitled executives with trust funds and zero competence. My gaze met Ryan's, unwavering. "So, unless you can prove your worth, I suggest you start packing your office." A muscle in his jaw twitched. "You think you can just waltz in here and take everything from me?" His voice was low, shaking with barely restrained fury. I exhaled slowly, savoring the moment. "No, Ryan. I didn't take anything. I earned it. Unlike you." The silence was suffocating. The reality of his downfall settled into his shoulders, his fingers tightening around the edge of the table. But just as I prepared to deliver the final blow, Ryan's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, and then his lips curled into a slow, triumphant smirk. You really thought you could outplay Dad, he murmured, his voice dripping with amusement. He turned the phone around, letting me see the email that had just arrived. Urgent, ownership dispute filed, Thomas Carter. A lawsuit. I kept my expression neutral, but my mind raced. I had expected resistance, just not this fast. Ryan leaned back, smugness returning to his features. Dad says hello, by the way. Before I reveal the move that turned everything back in my favor, the moment that left an entire press room speechless, I want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your country's flag in the comments below. And if you've ever had to fight for something you believe in, hit that like button, because trust me, this battle is far from over. I took a slow breath, forcing myself to stay calm. Ryan thought he had won. He thought my father's legal challenge would be enough to stop me. He had no idea who he was dealing with. I straightened my blazer and slid a second folder across the table. Ryan, you might want to read this before you celebrate too soon. His smirk faltered as he hesitated, then yanked open the folder. His eyes flicked across the document, scanning the legal jargon, and with every passing second, I watched the blood drain from his face. He shook his head. No. No, this is a lie. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my legs. It's not. 3 days ago, I legally dissolved Carter and Company and transferred all assets into a new entity, one Dad has no control over. His lawsuit? I tapped the folder. It's meaningless. He's fighting for a company that no longer exists. The boardroom fell into stunned silence. One of the senior executives cleared his throat. So, you mean? Carter and Company is gone. I smiled. Phoenix Holdings is the only thing that remains. And I own all of it. Ryan shot up from his chair, sending it scraping against the marble floor. His fists clenched at his sides, his breathing ragged. You think this is over? His voice shook with barely restrained rage. You think you can just erase our legacy? Dad will. My phone buzzed. I pulled it out, turned the screen toward Ryan, and let him see the incoming call. Thomas Carter. I answered. What the hell have you done? My father's voice was ice, sharp and controlled, but I could hear the fury simmering beneath. I exhaled slowly, savoring this moment. Just what you taught me, Dad, I said smoothly. I took control. There was a pause, just long enough for me to know I had hit my mark. Then, his voice dropped to something colder, more dangerous. This isn't over, Danielle. I smiled. I know. I ended the call and turned back to Ryan, who was still frozen in place, his world crumbling around him. I stood up, gathering my things, and pushed one final document across the table. Effective immediately, you are being placed under financial review. Ryan blinked. You can't do that. I can. And I just did. The doors to the conference room swung open, and 2 uniformed officers stepped inside. Mr. Ryan Carter, one of them said, his voice firm. We need you to come with us. Ryan's head snapped toward them, panic flashing in his eyes. What? This is insane. On what grounds? I feigned a sympathetic sigh. Turns out someone's been funneling company funds to cover their personal expenses. And after I took over, well, let's just say the numbers didn't add up. His face turned ghostly pale. He turned to the board members, searching for support, but no one moved. Dad will fix this, he whispered, almost to himself. And then, as if on cue, the phone in my hand buzzed again. I glanced down at the screen, my smile widening. A new email. From Thomas Carter. Subject, you just made the biggest mistake of your life. I locked my phone and met Ryan's desperate gaze one last time. Oh, Ryan, I murmured, stepping closer. It was over the moment you handed me that $20 coupon. The officers grabbed his arms, dragging him toward the door as he thrashed and shouted protests that no one cared to hear. As the doors closed behind him, silence settled over the room once more. I turned to the remaining board members, adjusting the cuff of my sleeve. Now that we've cleaned house, I said smoothly, let's talk about the future. That night, I returned to my penthouse, the one my family never knew I had. Jacob was waiting for me, a bottle of champagne in hand. Well, he said, pouring me a glass. You did it. I took the glass, swirled the liquid, and met his gaze with a slow, satisfied smile. No, I corrected. I won. The city stretched before me, glittering with lights, but my focus remained on the glowing screen in my hand. The email was short, cold, and laced with quiet menace. You just made the biggest mistake of your life. Thomas Carter never bluffed. My father was a strategist, a kingmaker, a man who had built his empire by crushing anyone who dared to challenge him. And now, for the first time, I was his enemy. I exhaled slowly, pushing the tension from my shoulders. I had anticipated resistance. I just hadn't expected him to strike back this fast. 40 minutes later, I stepped into the boardroom. The air was thick with unease. Ryan sat at the far end of the table, his usual arrogance replaced by something dangerously close to desperation. I took my seat at the head, my fingers resting lightly on the polished surface. My acquisition was legal, I said, my voice steady. My leadership is already improving the company. This lawsuit? It's nothing more than a desperate attempt to hold on to power. The board members shifted uncomfortably, some avoiding my gaze. That's when my father's lawyer, Richard Vaughn, cleared his throat. Miss Carter, he said carefully, there's an issue. A spike of unease slid down my spine. I kept my expression unreadable. What issue? He slid a document across the table. I picked it up, and my blood ran cold. It was a contract. A contract with my name on it. A contract I had never signed. According to this, 3 weeks ago, I had agreed to transfer my shares to a holding company owned by Thomas Carter. This wasn't just a legal challenge. This was a setup. A perfect, ironclad fraud. I barely heard Ryan chuckle beside me. I looked up, my vision sharpening like a blade. This is fake. Richard folded his hands. Then you'll have no problem proving that in court. I clenched my jaw. They knew. They knew that courts took months, even years, to resolve disputes like this. By the time I cleared my name, the damage would be done. My ownership would be frozen. Ryan would be reinstated as CEO. My father had played his move flawlessly. I exhaled slowly. He thought he had won. He had no idea I had been planning for this exact moment. I tapped the microphone embedded in the table. Ladies and gentlemen, I said, keeping my voice smooth, it seems my father believes he can rewrite history. Ryan smirked. Or maybe he just knows how to play the game better than you. I tilted my head. You know what's funny, Ryan? I reached into my folder and pulled out my own document. This one was very real. I slid it across the table to Richard. His face lost all color. Ryan leaned forward, trying to see what had shaken him. What is that? Richard swallowed hard, his voice barely above a whisper. A dissolution agreement. I smiled. That's right. I turned to the board. 3 days ago, I officially dissolved Carter and Company. Murmurs erupted around the table. Ryan shot out of his chair. You what? I let the moment sink in. My father had assumed I would run Carter and Company under Phoenix Holdings, the investment company I had secretly built for years. What he didn't know was that I had shut it down. Transferred every single asset into a new company. One he had no control over. His fraudulent contract? Worthless. Thomas Carter had just lost his greatest battle before he even realized it had started. Ryan looked like he was going to explode. You think this is over? He spat. Dad's going to. I raised a hand. No, Ryan. I reached for my phone, tapped a contact, and held it up for the room to hear. The line rang twice before my father's voice came through. What the hell have you done? The board members froze. Ryan's smirk vanished. I leaned back in my chair, victorious. Just what you taught me, Dad, I said softly. I won. Silence filled the boardroom, thick and unforgiving. Ryan sat frozen, his face pale with disbelief. The board members, once loyal to my father, now shifted uneasily in their seats, realizing they had backed the wrong horse. And through the speakerphone, Thomas Carter's voice cracked with rage. Danielle, what the hell have you done? I leaned forward, savoring the moment. I did what you always told me to do, Dad. I let the weight of my words sink in. I took control. The realization hit Ryan like a physical blow. His hands gripped the table like it was the only thing keeping him afloat. This is a bluff, he muttered. There's no way. I didn't let him finish. I turned to the board, sliding one final document across the table. Carter and Company is no longer under my father's holdings, I stated clearly. And as the sole majority shareholder, I'm making my first executive decision. I looked directly at Ryan. You're fired. The room exploded. Ryan shoved back his chair, knocking over a glass of water. You can't. I can, I cut in, my voice sharp. And I just did. I turned to the board members, who were too stunned to argue. If anyone has objections, you're welcome to voice them. I gestured to the financial reports on the screen. But let's be honest, you all knew Ryan was sinking this company. You just didn't care because my father was protecting him. No one spoke. Because they knew I was right. Ryan's breathing was ragged, his face turning a deep shade of red. His hands clenched into tight fists. For a second, I thought he might lose control completely. But before he could lash out, the conference room doors swung open. Security. 2 uniformed officers stepped inside, their expressions stone cold. Mr. Ryan Carter, one of them announced, we need you to come with us. Ryan whirled around, his eyes wide with genuine fear. What? He stammered. My lips curled into a slow, satisfied smile. Oh, didn't I mention? Before this meeting, I had sent a full financial audit of Carter and Company to the Securities and Exchange Commission. Ryan's blood drained from his face. You. I shrugged. Turns out someone's been embezzling company funds to cover their personal expenses. I sighed, mock disappointment dripping from my voice. And after I took over, well, the numbers didn't add up. Ryan's entire body tensed. Dad will fix this, he whispered, almost to himself. And then, as if on cue, the speakerphone crackled. Thomas Carter's voice, usually so unshakable, was cold and flat. I'm sorry, Ryan. Ryan froze. His head snapped toward the phone, his mouth opening slightly, stunned. Thomas sighed. I told you to cover your tracks. Ryan's breath hitched. Dad, please. But the line went dead. Security moved in, gripping Ryan by the arms. He tried to fight, but it was useless. Danielle, he hissed, his voice shaking with fury. You think you've won? This isn't over. I stepped closer, lowering my voice so only he could hear. Oh, Ryan, I whispered. It was over the moment you handed me that discount coupon. His face twisted in pure hatred. And then he was dragged away. The moment the door shut, a weight lifted off my chest. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just fighting to be seen. I was seen. And I wasn't finished yet. The silence in the boardroom stretched for what felt like an eternity. The weight of everything that had just happened hung thick in the air. Ryan was gone, dragged out in disgrace, and my father, Thomas Carter, the man who once ruled this empire with an iron grip, had just lost his most prized possession. I turned to the board members, smoothing my blazer with deliberate calm. Now that we've cleaned house, I said, my voice steady, let's talk about the future. The men and women around the table exchanged uneasy glances, their loyalties visibly shifting. They had spent years catering to my father and brother, treating me as an afterthought. But now, they were staring at the woman who had just outmaneuvered them all. One of them, a senior partner named Howard Ellis, cleared his throat. "Ms. Carter, given the circumstances, what are your plans for the company?" I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Simple," I said. "We rebuild. But this time, we do it right." I gestured toward the financial reports still glowing on the large screen behind me. "Under my brother's leadership, this company has been hemorrhaging money for years. Decisions were made based on ego and nepotism, not strategy." I let my gaze sweep across the room. "That ends today." There was a murmur of agreement. Some of them were still processing what had just happened, but others, particularly those who had been sidelined under my father and brother's rule, were starting to see the possibilities. I reached for the final document in my folder and slid it across the table. "This is my new leadership structure," I said. "Effective immediately, every executive position will be evaluated based on performance. No more free passes. No more inherited titles." Howard hesitated, then nodded. "That's a bold move." I met his eyes. "That's what it takes to win." The meeting adjourned soon after, with most of the board still too stunned to object. Some of them, I knew, would scramble to align themselves with me. Others would resist. That was fine. I didn't need their approval. I had already won. As I walked out of the boardroom, Jacob was waiting for me in the hallway, arms crossed. "That was brutal," he said, his voice laced with admiration. "I think you actually scared them." I smirked. "Good." We stepped into the executive elevator, and as the door slid shut, Jacob leaned against the railing, studying me. "So what's next?" he asked. I glanced down at my phone, where another notification had just come in. This time, it wasn't from my father. It was from a rival firm, one that had been circling Carter and Company for years, waiting for an opportunity. An opportunity that I had just created. I turned the screen toward Jacob, watching as his brows lifted in surprise. "They want a meeting," I said. "Tonight." He let out a low whistle. "Damn. You're not even gonna let them catch their breath, huh?" I slid my phone back into my pocket. "No," I said simply. "Because I know my father. He's already making his next move." Jacob studied me for a moment, then nodded. "All right. Let's end this." We stepped out of the elevator and into the New York night, the city buzzing with energy around us. The war wasn't over yet. But I was about to make damn sure it would be. The restaurant was dimly lit, the kind of place where billion-dollar deals were made over glasses of aged whiskey and filet mignon. I sat at a secluded corner table, my posture relaxed but my mind sharp. Across from me sat Nathan Holloway, CEO of Holloway and Company, one of the most ruthless players in the finance world. He had been circling Carter and Company for years, waiting for the moment Thomas Carter showed weakness. And tonight, I was offering him something better. He swirled his drink, studying me with an amused glint in his eyes. "You know," he said, "I expected Thomas to be sitting in that chair, not his daughter." I smirked. "Then you didn't do your homework." Nathan chuckled. "Clearly." He leaned forward. "So, tell me, Dani. What exactly are you proposing?" I slid a document across the table. "An alliance." He lifted a brow, flipping open the folder. "You already own Carter and Company. Why would you need me?" I folded my hands. "Because my father isn't done fighting. He'll use every connection he has to claw his way back, and I have no intention of letting him." I met his gaze. "You want a piece of the empire he built? Help me destroy what's left of his influence." Nathan glanced over the proposal, his expression unreadable. He was considering it. We both knew that Carter and Company was still a force in the market, but with the right backing, I could crush my father completely. A long silence stretched between us. Then, he closed the folder and smiled. "I like the way you think." He extended his hand. "You've got a deal." I took his hand in a firm shake, sealing an agreement that would send shockwaves through the industry. This wasn't just about beating my father anymore. It was about rewriting the rules of the game. The next morning, I stood at the top of Phoenix Tower, the headquarters of my newly rebuilt empire. The sun was rising over Manhattan, bathing the skyline in gold. Behind me, Jacob stood with 2 glasses of champagne. "To victory?" he asked, holding one out. I took it, but I didn't raise it just yet. My phone vibrated with a notification. Breaking news: Thomas Carter steps down from finance industry, the end of an era. I let out a slow breath. It was over. Ryan was ruined. My father had been forced out of the world he once ruled. And I, the daughter they all underestimated, stood at the top. I finally clinked my glass against Jacob's. "To the future," I corrected. I took a slow sip, the taste of victory settling on my tongue. Because this wasn't just an ending. It was only the beginning. This story isn't just about revenge, it's about resilience, strategy, and proving your worth in a world that underestimates you. Dani didn't just take back what was hers, she built something greater, something no one could take away. It's a reminder that success isn't given, it's earned through grit, intelligence, and the courage to stand up for yourself. Now, I want to hear from you. Did you enjoy Dani's journey? Comment 2 if you loved it, or 7 if you think she went too far. And if you've ever had to fight for what you deserve, hit that like button, you're not alone in your battle. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another story like this. Because trust me, there's always more to come. Fire.